Ah, okay. You get to evaluate me. That sounds good too. Give me a good review, and I'll have to write a review. I'll rebuttal. Oh, I was going to show you the letter. Oh, well, that's okay. So, yeah, anybody else? So, it's really anybody else working on, have a work in progress? We call it a WIP. So, in the US, when we have either junior faculty or we have fellows, grad students, we will get them together once a week for a WIP session. Do you have similar thing? Maybe you call it something else, but the WIP is a work in progress, works in progress. So then they have an opportunity to present, even it may just be a research idea or an abstract of an idea, or they're working on a paper and they want everybody to read their introduction or read their look at their tables and give them feedback, whatever it is. So it's an opportunity to have peers, all your peers give you feedback. It's also an opportunity for you to review your peers' work. And in reviewing their work, you get much better at thinking about how to present your own work, how to ask a good question. You know, sometimes just trying to ask the right research question can take 2 hours of conversation. You know, because if you start off with the wrong question, it's not, you know, the research is not going to go well. And when you're more junior, it's really hard to ask the right question. You might have a general idea of what you want to study, but what you really want to ask and how you want to go about studying it. Do you want to develop a questionnaire? Do you want to start with some qualitative interviews, focus groups? Do you want to do mixed methods? There's a whole variety of ways of trying to start answering the question. Super helpful to get together with a WIP. So, anybody have anything? I didn't really give you warning, but we heard from one person here about their paper, their analysis. Is anybody else working on anything currently? And if you don't do that, you know, if you don't have a WIP here as part of your program, you should suggest starting it. Super helpful. The way we organize it is with faculty and the fellows, mostly with fellows. And so there's 4 or 5 faculty assigned and maybe 15 or so fellows. And again, they meet weekly, and each fellow is assigned, like next week it's going to be your turn to present wherever you're at, the idea or the paper or whatever it is. Or maybe there's 2 fellows per session. It depends upon how extensive. And it's really good, and it gets you used to both accepting critiques and criticism as well as giving, you know, helpful comments. So I had mentioned a thought piece. I'll just kind of go over a couple of PowerPoints on what a thought piece is, because all of you could work on one of those tomorrow if there's an area that you're interested in. And again, I'd recommend you find a mentor, a more senior person if you're junior, to work with you on it. First of all, they're better known in the field, and they also help guide you through it. And it's a nice way to, as we say, to get your feet wet with writing and publishing. That doesn't require, you know, 6 months of data collection. So, and what they are is articulating a new idea or perspective in a meaningful way. So it may be a new intellectual framework, a new way of thinking about approaching a problem in public health or something that you're aware of. You may address a topic. You make your case in words for what you believe. And they are scholarship. You know, they're not peer-reviewed research, but they're certainly scholarship. That is, they show that you're a thoughtful, intellectual, academic person. They're going to count in the number of publications you have for promotion, maybe not, but they do kind of immediately point you out as sort of a thoughtful, expert person in the area, and that's nice. And they're fun. They're fun to do. The one that my faculty member just wrote for the New England Journal, she's not a researcher, but it's her second time publishing in the New England Journal, which is a big deal. very hard to get in there. And this last piece was on physician payment. The U.S., there's some changes in how doctors get paid in the U.S. by the government when they're taking care of patients who have government insurance. We have either Medicare or Medicaid, either insurance for people who are generally older or disabled or poor. And the payment schemes are complicated and whatnot. Without going into too many details, they're changing some about how that money flows to big hospitals and how that money then gets distributed. And she had really strong feelings about what the policy was and how it was being implemented at our institution, at a large academic health institution. And so she wanted to write about it. And so it gave her an opportunity, and she's sort of become an expert, some in kind of physician workforce issues, but not as a researcher, more as a thoughtful person who's also an advocate. She goes to, like, the California state legislature to testify and to talk about, not as a researcher, but just as a smart doctor involved in policy work. And the way she continues to lend to her, like, stature and expertise is by doing some of this writing. But it's also, she was really very interested in this area, so she wrote about it. And it's not easy. It took her a long time. I worked with her on it. I was not a co-author. I just gave her a lot of feedback. It was very political as well, so she had to be very careful because she's writing about things that are controversial, both at her institution and whatnot. And there it was, her out there in the world in the New England Journal of Medicine, probably read by thousands of people and have an influence on the thinking in this broad area. Very satisfying, right? Super satisfying. So one of the very first things I ever published was a thought piece. And this was on sex, AIDS, and the elderly. Again, I kind of like these catchy titles, I guess. Maybe too much. But this was about how, in the HIV epidemic, that this group of people, and the elderly, when it came to HIV/AIDS statistics, was, I think, 55 and older. And kind of saying that since the beginning of the epidemic, about, if I'm remembering, 20%, 25%. People, I have to read my own paper to remember. I wrote this so long ago, I don't remember anything about it, but it was at the age of 60 that counts for 25% of cases since the beginning of the data was being kept. Sort of a shocking thing. You wouldn't have thought that. And so I was kind of getting that out there as we need to pay attention to this group of people. I didn't do research. I mean, I pulled some data. That's not doing research to kind of back up my argument. Thought pieces often, you need data in there. You need some empirical information. But I was saying this is an important group that we've ignored, and we shouldn't ignore them. Okay, so maybe, did it have an influence on policy? I have no idea. This is a decent journal. This was in the Archives of Internal Medicine, a pretty decent journal. So, yeah, and I could do that before I was, and I did this alone, so this wasn't really my advice to you, would probably be to co-author with somebody else, a more senior person, but you can also try to do it alone, like Beth did my faculty member. Here's another one I did, this one more recently in Lancet, about mentoring clinical trainees and need for high touch. Lancet's another very high impact journal. They actually came to us and said, we want you to write something about this. Sure, good to get an answer. So this was about how our young doctors are burnt out and depressed. And so if we're going to be mentoring them, we need to keep that in mind and focus on personal and professional balance. Something I really care about. So I had a platform to be able to write about it with my colleague, Dr. Wilkes. So he and I wrote this together. And that was really fun. And is it going to help? I don't really worry too much about promotion anymore, because I'm really fine with that. But it helped me get an opinion out there in the world that I thought was important. I just did this one recently. This was in my old journal. This was like 2021. So this was, we call Responding to the Great Resignation. So again, kind of a cute title. Detoxifying Rebuild the Culture. All right. So this was responding to the idea that there have been so many people leaving healthcare, resigning from healthcare for various reasons, and kind of somewhat in response to COVID, and there's a lot of public discussion about this. So we decided to write a paper about that. So this is a thought piece. This wasn't the data. We have data in there about how many people are leaving. We pulled some data, but it was a thought piece. And it was really fun to do. I included a junior person with us. He took the lead. He's quite senior. We're probably at the same level, but he took the lead, so I became senior author, which is fine. I'm happy with that. And then Beth Griffiths was middle author, who's quite junior, but was really happy to have her published with Mark and I. So it's kind of a good, kind of a good thing. So this one is probably my latest thought piece. So how are thought pieces different? You have a thesis or an argument. You need to have something that you're thinking about, that you want to communicate. You have an idea, you have a thesis. The focus is not on generating new data, it's an argument, and you use data to support your argument. Unlike data-driven pieces where you find an argument that supports your data. Okay. So this is the other way around. It's not really an opinion necessarily, you are grounding it in data and evidence. You're not just making that up out of the air. Not writing. I don't like guava. This is why. It matters. It's got to matter, and it has to be data grounded, but not from it. Often that's not written wrong. You need a mentor who's invested in the project and can help you communicate the ideas. And it's a lot of work. It's hard to articulate your thoughts in a meaningful way. These are not easy to write, even though they're short, and you're not analyzing data, but it's still challenging. But fun. They can be high impact. They're often cited, and it allows you to think about a new paradigm. And journals publish these under very different names, so you kind of have to look. You have an idea, you care about something, you want to write about it, and then you kind of start looking to see, what journal where might this fit? And what are they called? Because you need to know how to submit it, instructions for authors. So JAMA has like viewpoints or special communication. New England Journal has its perspective. That's how my faculty member is published the things. You can see the word count varies also, 1,200 to 8,000. I looked at the American Journal of Public Health, which is not usually a journal I publish in, but maybe one that you guys aspire to. And they have both comments and what they call opinion editorials. Maybe opinions and editorials. So they have a few different ways. You can also put a thought piece out. I'm sure most of the journals will have, they certainly have editorials. An editorial is a thought piece. Right? An editorial is when you're commenting on someone else's work in the journal and trying to put it in context. You're not criticizing it. The journal's already decided to publish it, but you're trying to put it in context. You're commenting on the significance of it, or maybe even on where we should go from here based on that research. There's a variety of ways of, or maybe you do disagree, and they put in, they came to a conclusion when you want to write an editorial that says, yeah, there's another way of looking at it, or whatever it is. And usually those are invited. The journal will invite, usually a more senior mentor to do an editorial, or maybe you read something and say, I really have opinions about this, senior mentor. Will you write an editorial with me? Maybe do you know anybody at the journal you can contact to see if they'd be interested in one? And here's are just the steps. You'll have this in your material if you decide you want to do this. You obviously choose your audience. And then you end with some recommendations maybe. And certainly we did that like in our resignation article. basically ended with some thoughts, some ideas about how institutions, how we should be responding to this resignation. What do we need to do? How do we need to change the environment to be more responsive to what the needs are now post-COVID of our faculty and staff? So it wasn't just like blah, blah, blah. Here's the problem. How should we move on from here? That's an important piece of it. You need to at least articulate a solution. So those are kind of thought pieces. I have the rest of the slides are around reviewing, and I think there's no better way to become a better writer than to get engaged in reviewing. And you can do that at any stage if you work with a mentor. You don't have to, if you're not published, you don't have the expertise and stuff reviewing, and you're not going to be asked by journals to review if you haven't published. But as soon as you publish a paper, the journals will take your name and say, oh, this person's an expert in, I keep picking on you because you told me your work, but if this person's an expert in cognitive decline or MCI, and now we have a paper that someone else just sent in about screening for MCI in the community, we're going to send her the paper and see if she's willing to be a reviewer. Journals are really hungry for reviewers. It's all volunteer work, and journals rely on reviewers for survival. They need reviewers, but everyone's gotten so busy that often we would have to ask sometimes 15 people to get 2 or 3 people to agree to review. And so if the journal's taking a long time to get back to you, it's probably because you have to help. And the more obscure your area, the longer it's going to take. So I'm going to talk some about reviewing and reviewers, but I think this is relevant for you all in that if you're going to get into this business of being an academic and doing research, you have an obligation to also serve as reviewers as part of your obligation to the field, to your colleagues. They're reviewing your work. That's how you get it published. You should also be in favor by agreeing to review. But if you've not done it before, you shouldn't do it without a mentor working with you. And that's how I've introduced some fellows or junior faculty to become reviewers and say, hey, I just got asked to review this paper. Do you want to do it with me? And let them do the first reads, so coming up with some comments. I'll read it, I'll give mine, we'll kind of do it together. And then I give them, when I write it and send it back to the journal, I'll say, hey, I did this review with Dr. So-and-so. So that he or she also gets credit for having done that. And it's good to list on your CV then that you are a reviewer for Lancet. And when you go up for promotion, there's an expectation that you serve as a reviewer. It's not, there's no specific, at least at my university, it's not like no one's counting how many times you did it or anything, but there's an expectation that as part of your service to the profession, you're serving as a reviewer. If you don't do it, it looks bad. And besides, it really helps you be better at what you do. It totally helps. No better way to become a better writer than to read other people's writing. So any questions about thought pieces? Then maybe we'll take like 10 minutes to go through the reviewing stuff, and we can end. Okay. I know it's getting into the afternoon. It's always hard after. Never accept a speaking engagement after lunch. So why do a review? How to decide? I don't know that I'm going to go through all of this in a lot of detail. You'll have the slides if you want to look at more detail. Really, the only way to really get into this is to do it, and again to talk to one of your mentors. Say, hey, I'd really like the experience reviewing. Next time you get asked, can you reach out to me? It's an area that you know anything about. You need to have some expertise, right? Why do it? Professional advancement. It keeps you smart. Journals get to know you. You can sharpen your skills. Work with a mentor, as I said. You have social responsibility to do it. You're kind of guardian of the literature, right? You're reviewing the literature to say, This deserves to be in the peer-reviewed literature. This doesn't, or this needs to be improved. So you're making sure that the quality of the work in your area is good. That's really important. What makes for a good reviewer? You need expertise, either clinical, methodological, content area. You can have a conflict of interest. Okay, if you know the author and you really like them or don't like them, or they're, whatever, you feel like you can't be objective, don't do it. And the journals understand that. They'll ask you, and you say, sorry, I recommend somebody else because I grew up with this person. They're my best friend. I can't review their paper. Should you do it? You need to think, do you have the time? Do you have the experience? Do you have the expertise? Pretty obvious stuff. The time thing is really important because it drives journals crazy when they send it out and you would say you're going to do it, and then you sit on it, and sit on it, and sit on it, and you don't return it. So if you agree to do it, you need to turn it around within the time period. Usually they give you several weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It depends on the journal. But you want to make sure you return it in a timely manner. It's just not fair to the authors. You've been on the other end of this, and you keep asking the journal, like, do you have a decision for me? They're like, oh, we're waiting for one reviewer to get back to us. Oh, my gosh. So you don't want to be that one reviewer. It's just not nice to your colleagues. So, this is where, and in fact, this is in a way relevant. You may not be an official reviewer for a journal. Maybe your colleague says, hey, will you review my paper for me? I'm thinking about submitting it. It's the same approach you take if you're asked to be a reviewer. You want to skim the abstract and the tables first. And then you'll start reading it for content, clarity, and consistency. Is the message clear? Critical argument for the paper made? Why is the question important? Do you understand the aims and hypotheses asserted? So again, you're kind of going through these questions in your mind. Now, if you first do a quick overview, get an idea for it, and then you kind of dive into it. You want to read as some of you may have experts in stats. Most of you maybe some familiarity, but you're not teaching biostats. That's a whole different kind of review that's really important, but that's not what I'm talking about. So you'll be reading it as a non-statistician. Is it logical and understandable? And then you look at the discussion. Again, this is kind of why should we care? And I often look to go here. Sometimes I almost go here first to say, what kind of, I'm answering that last question first. Why should I care? Before I spend a lot of time figuring out, are the methods valid? Are the tables looking good? If in the end it's like, not really interested in this, they don't make the case for why this matters, I'm not going to waste my time with the other stuff. So do they make a compelling summary of their results? Discussion must stay within the bounds of their study, and never say this, okay? This is so common. Yeah, we did it. We've got some limitations, so therefore more research is needed. I think every editor in the world then rolls their eyes when they hear that. So that's not a conclusion. So fatal flaws are dual publication, plagiarism, ethical problems. Could be unexplained financial or other conflict of interest. We had a strict policy that we wouldn't take like opinion pieces or anything that wasn't like data-driven if it was supported by industry. Because there's always this conflict of interest. That's not true for all journals. But as a reviewer or as you're reading your friend's paper even, you want to pay attention to whether there's a potentially conflict of interest in there that needs to be explained. All RCTs should be registered. That's kind of a little bit beyond where most of you are at, but you want to be looking at that as well. I think I have some, yeah, some quotes. So these are helpful comments to authors and maybe helpful comments to your friends as well. Things like, hey, the tables would be easier to read if the rows and columns were reversed. So some very specific suggestions about how to make this more readable, more clear. Oh, sometimes there's stuff missing. It's not a fatal flaw, but you have to be sure to add information on response rate and sample size. That's missing. That's an obvious thing missing. You're reading your friend's paper. You want to make sure to give them that feedback ahead of time. You don't want the reviewer to be picking up on that. That's a pretty big oversight. So it'd be helpful to have more information on how the intervention adds to previous studies. The authors, and so sometimes as a reviewer or as a friend, you're saying, hey, you should be aware of this really pivotal article. Like, I'm surprised you wrote this whole paper on, use of nets and prevention of malaria, and this is the key research study that was done on this 20 years ago that you should have in your introduction. So, and the fact that you don't have that there makes it look like you don't really know the field. So add this in. Or sometimes conversely, this paper just came out last month, and I'm an expert in this area. I happen to know that. FYI, you should incorporate this. So that's really helpful when reviewers point out literature that you weren't aware of. Super helpful. So you want to be doing that as a reviewer for a journal or for your friend. And then you make comments to the editor, and this is what you don't see as authors, is what are the comments necessarily. These may be for the editor only. Okay, so some reviewers are really sweet to the author and really brutal in their comments to the editor, which isn't really fair, but like we see that. They're like, this is a decent study, blah, 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 blah. But to the editor, it's like, don't publish this. It's very weak. The methods were inappropriate, whatever. That's not really fair to the author. Sometimes they think the reviewer's being nice. Better just to be nice and honest. You don't have to be mean. You can be honest without being mean. But and again, you're saying, is it new? Is it true? Why should you care as a journal? You're doing this as a reviewer also. You should be doing this for your friend. So comments to the editor. This is a well-designed update. However, it may be better suited to another journal. Okay? So they may say that to the editor, and then you get a letter back saying, decent work, kind of interesting, but not for us. We'd write not for us 1,000 different ways. Okay, and that's often why you get rejected. Then there's sort of the conflict. I'm concerned that one of the authors is chairperson of XYZ Corporation, and the intervention uses a commercial product. Maybe a problem here. Are they just trying to advertise their product? Maybe it's a great product and it's fine, and it's rigorously done research. Fine. But you want to be aware of that. Or they may say, I think, there's some problems here. They need to be more concise. I think it can be successfully revised, you say to the editor. And so then you get a letter back from the journal saying, revise and resubmit. And then generally what you will say as a reviewer, accept as is, as I said, almost never, except with, usually it's one of these two. Reconsider after major revisions. You never say we'll accept after major revisions. You say we'll reconsider after major revisions, or sorry. I'll skip that. And then you kind of want to see, because sometimes you do the review and you're thinking, I wonder what other people thought about this. You hope that there's some agreement, but very often, and you'll see as authors, reviewer one said, this is wonderful work, I love it, fabulous paper, I just have a few minor comments. And reviewer two says, this is terrible, Well, how did you even think of this idea? I mean, sometimes they're quite disparate, and that can drive you crazy as an author. That's when it's fair enough to ask the editor, could you please help me figure out which reviewer I should be responding to here? Because they seem to have very different ideas about my paper. Again, I was talking to one of the senior faculty who was saying, I never wrote back. I never questioned anything I heard from a journal. You can question it. Some journals will ignore your questioning, but others may get back to you and clarify. And that should be the editor's role, then, to take your comments, the other reviewer's comments, and try to write an overview for the author. Remember, reviewers recommend and editors decide. So don't worry about making a recommend. I've recommended rejection or acceptance and had the editor accept. Maybe often I've recommended rejection. Like if they disagree, they're probably more lenient perhaps than reviewers often. They kind of like the paper, and reviewers think their job is to be highly critical. And that's fine. That's totally up to the editor to decide in the end if they want to accept the paper or ask for revisions. That's not your problem. And your review should be helpful even if the manuscript is rejected. And particularly if you're reviewing for a more junior author, think of yourselves, most of you in here. You want to get something back that's kind, that's helpful, that's supportive, that's constructive, right? Even if it's saying, sorry, we're not going to accept your paper, you want help. So I'll take more time and write more words to a more junior author. If it's a really senior author, like, okay, whatever, I'm moving on. So you put the constructive feedback in there, but for a junior person, you want to put a little bit more if you can. Spend a little more time. Okay, good. So publication's essential, and it's fun. Hopefully you get a sense that this should and could be fun. It's hard work, but I mean, how lucky we are to have a job where that's what we get to do, and hopefully you get paid for it. To think great thoughts, investigate the thoughts, and then write about them, and then send them out there into the world to try to change things. That's like, we're all lucky that we have that opportunity. I don't know what that's like. That's like really, that's a very unusual job. And I think that's a really great job. Writing up original research is formulaic, but not easy. So I kind of gave you the formula. You have the map. It doesn't mean that it's easy. There's some hills and whatnot. It may rain along the way, but you kind of know what you need to do. Editors and peer reviewers can be quirky, remember. So you might get rejected. Don't take it personally. We were talking about the expression we have, having thick skin, which apparently means something different in Thai. And I don't know how you translate that into Chinese. But in English, it means not taking rejection personally. Like thick skin means it can't get in so easily, right? Because if you're going to be an academic, you're going to get rejections, you'll get critiques. You take it with a good spirit and you move on. Persistence pays off. Consider writing a thought piece and then get experience as a reviewer, but work with a mentor for your first few reviews before you do it. And certainly, when you start publishing, you will be asked. Please try to say yes when you can. Not every time, perhaps you're too busy, but try to say yes. So that's what I got for you today. Thank you so much. We spent a lot of time together. It's a bit of a dense topic, and it's generally better, to do this when you bring your own work and you have some opportunity to work on it. So, maybe next time I do this. And then I can show you some examples also. The one thing we didn't get into was that rebuttal letter or the revision letter, which is really an art. But the best way to do that is when you actually have to do it. And then you work with a mentor. I can show you an example, but it'll just look like a lot of polite language and changing, But that's another whole piece that I think that is really hard the first few times you do it. And then you kind of figure out how to do it. It's another formula. Was there a hand up? No. Anybody? Any final questions or comments? Going once. I hope this was helpful. Maybe if you keep the slide set also and you're sitting down and working on this, some of the tips will kind of come back to you. And I have my card up here if anybody wants stay in contact with me, I'd be very happy to do that. I can't promise to read your papers in great detail. I wish I could do that. I just don't have I have to be honest, I don't have the time for that. But if there's some questions that come up or other things that you want to be in touch with me about, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Okay? Yeah.